There is a specific kind of fear that only hits you when you are inside your own home. It is the realization that the locks on your doors are just an illusion of safety, and that the person smiling at you from across the street might be waiting for the lights to go out. These 3 stories will make you check your windows before you go to sleep tonight. I was 12 years old when I learned that silence is the loudest sound in the world. My parents had gone out for the evening, leaving me in the care of my 18-year-old brother, Zach. But Zach, being a typical teenager, decided to sneak out to a friend's house the moment their car turned the corner. He made me promise not to snitch, and honestly, I didn't mind. Having the big house to myself felt like freedom. I set up camp in the den to watch horror movies, thinking I was brave. That was a mistake. About halfway through the film, the house started making those settling noises that old homes make. But my imagination turned every creak into a monster. Spooked, I turned off the TV and retreated to my bedroom upstairs to play video games. I got lost in the game for about an hour, until I felt a subtle vibration in the floor. Then, I heard the front door click shut downstairs. I sighed in relief, assuming Zach was back early. I waited for his heavy footsteps to run up the stairs to his room, but the sound never came. Instead, I heard slow, deliberate boots walking around the living room, pacing, stopping, then pacing again. My stomach dropped. I crept to my window and looked at the driveway. It was empty. Zach's car wasn't there. Panic washed over me instantly. I didn't have a phone, and I was trapped on the second floor. Then, the footsteps started coming up the stairs, one heavy step at a time. I scanned my room desperately. Under the bed felt too obvious. My only option was the small, crawl-in closet built into the wall. I squeezed inside, pulling the door shut until it clicked, and held my breath. Moments later, my bedroom door creaked open. Through the slats of the closet door, I listened to a stranger walking around my room. I heard the sound of my desk drawers being slid open and the shuffling of papers. The footsteps moved closer until they stopped right in front of the closet. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to every god I knew. I was certain he could hear my heart hammering against my ribs. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, breathing heavily. Then, miraculously, he turned and walked out. I stayed in that closet for 2 hours, shaking violently, until I heard Zach screaming my name from the hallway. When I finally came out, the house was destroyed. Electronics, jewelry, and cash were gone. But the material things didn't matter. What haunts me to this day is that pause in front of the closet. He knew someone was in the room. He just chose not to look. Before we continue to the next nightmare, if you are enjoying the thrill of these true stories, please hit the like button. It helps the channel grow and ensures I can keep bringing you the scariest content on the internet. Now, let's get back to the horror. They say you should never talk to strangers. But what do you do when the monster is a family friend? I grew up in a small rural town where everyone knew everyone. We had a neighbor named David, who was a fixture in our lives. He drank beers with my uncle, helped my grandpa with yard work, and was generally considered part of the family. One night, when I was about 10, my grandma went to a bingo night, and my grandpa went to pick her up. I was left alone for a gap of maybe 20 minutes. I knew the rules about keeping the door locked, but when a knock came 5 minutes later, I didn't hesitate to ask who it was. It was David. He told me he needed to speak to my uncle. I explained through the door that my uncle wasn't home, but David insisted. He said he was a neighbor, not a stranger, and that he just needed to come in for a second. Trusting him, I unlocked the door. That was the moment my innocence died. David stumbled in, towering over me. The smell of stale alcohol was overwhelming. His eyes were bloodshot and completely unfocused. I tried to tell him to wait in the kitchen, but he grabbed my shoulder with a grip like iron. He dragged me toward the kitchen counter, his mood shifting from drunk to demonic. He grabbed a large carving knife from the block and pressed the flat of the blade against my throat. He whispered that if I made a sound, he would cut me. I was paralyzed with terror, tears streaming down my face. Suddenly, headlights flashed through the living room window. My grandparents were back. My grandma walked in first, saw David holding me hostage with a knife, and let out a blood-curdling scream. My grandpa didn't even pause. He roared with a rage I had never seen and charged at David. David shoved me to the floor and met my grandpa in a brawl. My grandma shielded me, covering my eyes, but I could hear the struggle. My grandpa, despite his age, completely overpowered him. He dragged David out the front door and threw him into the yard. Here is the part that still gives me chills. We never saw David again. My grandpa didn't call the police. Years later, when I asked my grandma about it, she got quiet and simply said my grandpa went night hunting after that incident. In our town, nobody asks questions when a truck drives into the woods late at night. I think David got exactly what was coming to him. This final story happened during spring break of 2020, and it is a reminder that you never truly know what is going on in someone else's mind. I was 15, home alone while my parents were out of town. I got a frantic call from a friend, Mason. He sounded desperate and begged to drop off another mutual friend, Neil, at my house for the night. I knew Neil. He was a bit eccentric, but I never considered him dangerous. I reluctantly agreed. Mason dropped Neil off and sped away like his car was on fire. That should have been my first red flag. When Neil walked in, the vibe in the house changed instantly. He looked at me with dead, shark-like eyes and asked, "Are all the doors locked?" I told him yes. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then, he raised his hand and waved at an empty corner of the room, as if greeting an invisible person. I tried to laugh it off, offering him some water. We went into the kitchen. I turned my back for a split second to open the fridge. When I turned around, Neil was standing by the open silverware drawer. His hand was slowly reaching for a sharp steak knife. Adrenaline dumped into my system. I didn't think, I just reacted. I lunged forward, grabbed his wrist, and slammed the drawer shut. Neil didn't fight back. He didn't get angry. He just chuckled. A low, dry sound that made my skin crawl. I knew right then that if I didn't get him out of my house, one of us was going to die. I managed to convince him to walk to the park with me. The second he stepped out the back door, I slammed it, threw the deadbolt, and called for help. My brother arrived minutes later with some friends. They found Neil in the driveway, rambling about how he needed to sacrifice someone to save himself from a secret society. It turned out Neil was having a massive schizophrenic break triggered by drugs. Mason had dropped him off because he was terrified of him. I still think about that moment in the kitchen. If I hadn't turned around when I did, that steak knife would have ended up in my back. These stories prove that safety is fragile. Whether it's a random intruder, a trusted neighbor, or a friend losing their mind, the danger is always closer than you think. Stay vigilant, trust your gut, and lock your doors. If you want to see more true horror stories, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. I'll see you in the shadows.